Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I bet you're wondering what your garden should look like or should not look like. But never fear, we are here to help you. And I don't know, Batavia, would it be safe to say that in this episode there will be a little bit of contrast between our gardens for this month?
I think it has to be.
It has to be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing.
Unless you've moved, right?
No, I absolutely have not moved. I don't
we
think.
know folks aren't signing that change.org petition, so I'm still here.
I know, man. We didn't meet what was the goal?
20 million?
No, it wasn't that high.
1,000?
I think it was only 10,000. We didn't get 10,000 signatures. I think we got 5, so you're safe. But we also only announced it once at the end of an episode.
Yeah.
I bet if we announced it at the beginning of every episode, like, there's people right now going to change.org to try and find it. Guys, that's sure enough. I put it on and forgot about it. I ain't checked it not a single time, so I don't know where. It could be at 10,000. I have no clue. But, yeah. So August is a tricky month. And, I don't think we're necessarily here today to give out, like, this is what you should do. I think it's like, this is what you can expect and how we can mold that in the future. I think that's really where we're at, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's definitely level setting,
That's a good way to put it, level setting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
I know what you're thinking. I know that, you've revved yourself up all season.
Yeah.
And now you're looking out at your garden like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Exactly. But before we continue on, I just want everybody to know that you are listening to the Backyard Gardens podcast, and welcome. If you're new, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, thank you. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by becoming an Apple subscriber or a patron. You can visit our Amazon list with all of the products that we use in our gardens and we recommend. You can also buy a pack of seeds from us. So buy 2 packs, because if you buy 2 packs right now, then guess what? You get another pack of seeds for free. And come see us on YouTube. But I am your host, Ben, and I'm with my co-host, Miss Batavia. Look at her. And we are going to talk about gardening. All right, so...
Oh, wait.
Oh,
shoot. I thought this was our other podcast.
Oh,
okay,
don't tell nobody about that yet. It's not ready for release. We're not prepared for that.
No.
All right. So right now, what does your garden look like?
It's a mixture. Mostly green things, right? Making me wonder, did I put too much nitrogen out here? Like why is everything just green, right? I know, mostly green things, bushy plants, a bit of yellowing and browning of some things. And then as normal, I got I guess we're going to call it black dirt.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I mean, I've got stuff growing in my garden. I've got some things that are thriving and I've got other things that are dying. It's a mixture across the board. We've had a very good year so far. Very happy with what we've pulled in, and there's always going to be room for improvement, but we've got, pest damage. We've got heavy fruiting crops. We've got dying plants, thriving plants, finished plants, just across the board. We got a lot going on, but it's one of those things when you come into this time of year, it can be very difficult. And I think we need to be realistic about what we're going to see, And when you first started gardening, Batavia, what did you think your garden would look like up to about this point of the year? Like, what did you expect to happen?
Well, this is hard because my garden, when I first started gardening, would have just recently had been planted, right? So
I love the honesty. Real, right? I absolutely love the honesty.
But if I go back to the idea of like planting and we're in midsummer with that in mind, I feel like I should have vegetables falling off of the plants. Like that would have been my thought. Right. Like plenty of tomatoes, plenty of cucumbers, right? Like peppers, beyond my wildest dreams. That's actually a little bit of an exaggeration. But I definitely back then thought that these plants would just be producing and producing and producing. This is before I had any thought of how many pepper plants do you need really to do the thing that you want to do with those peppers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, even back then, early on, I'm trying to think about moments where I have been realistic versus the many moments I haven't been in my garden.
Yeah,
I
I
didn't know you were
know.
gonna go there.
I know when I first started, I mean, two words: Garden of Eden. That's what I expected. You know what I mean? Just
Mm-hmm.
perfection.
Yeah.
I was sadly mistaken, and it's been a learning process over the years too, because you go so long, and we completely look forward to our summer gardens because typically you're not really worried about temperatures too much. Typically speaking, if you're growing your average garden, meaning like your tomatoes and your average
Yeah.
summer crops, you're not really trying to push the limits or anything like that. So you're not worried about temperatures, you're not worrying
Mm-hmm.
about amounts of sun, stuff like that. And I had envisioned, literally a food forest. And that's changed over the years
Yeah.
dramatically, and it didn't take long for it to. I remember, I remember we used to grow yellow squash, and I
Mm-hmm.
remember pulling squash off of it and looking at the pest damage. And when I say pest, I mean the vine borer damage, and
Oh
just
yeah.
being like, "What in the world?" and just freaking out about trying to stop it. And then I realized I can't stop it. There's literally nothing you can do. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't really want to hear about wrapping it in tin foil, and I ain't doing that. I figured out a way around it, but in the process, like it was a big deal. So it's been very up and down for me into this time of year, and I'm comfortable with the way my garden looks and is acting now, and
Mm-hmm.
truly it's supposed to be that way. It's
Yeah.
supposed to. And once you realize that, I think it goes a lot farther. It makes it a lot easier for you.
Things are a bit more predictable based on
Yes.
the way my garden operates now. And maybe I'm just blocking it out. I don't remember a lot of pest pressure back in the early days of my garden. I remember things just again not being bountiful. And in some cases, I didn't think that was an issue. In other cases, I did. Right. So it was more of that's probably where the beginning of, if it does well comes from, my garden language.
Yeah.
Right. Because there were years of things that just really didn't take off. And then you fast forward, you create this kind of ecosystem, and guess what? My garden brings all the pests to the yard,
Yeah.
so there's that. I mean, it was years before I probably even grew any type of summer squash in my garden. So maybe that's the reason why I never saw them. I
Well,
wasn't growing it.
and I think too, I think when you're your first year or two of gardening, you're always going to get pest pressure. And this is not a pest episode, so don't freak out, Batavia. But it's one of those things where I think in time, as you continue gardening, growing more and more, I think that you bring in the pests. Like they just know, like you said, you've built an ecosystem to some extent. Like, for instance, we built our pond out there and we've got a resident frog now. Right, we've
Oh
seen him
yeah.
multiple times, and we have frogs all around us, but we see the same frog all the time,
Hmm.
right? So what
Hmm.
does that mean? We're building that ecosystem, right? Which is what we
Yeah.
wanted to do.
Which is interesting because this is year one. It's like
Yeah,
he found the
he's
pond
a
just that
big
quickly. Yeah.
bastard too. If he gets any bigger,
Hmm.
I might have some fried frog legs. Just saying. If y'all ain't ever ate frog legs, you're missing out on the spice of
I've never
life.
had frog
Oh,
legs.
ooh, 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 man, it's good eating. But he's way too small for that. But just saying, like, I think that we've built ecosystems in our gardens, and so in time it gets more and more and more difficult, right?
Hmm.
So it's just, and this month is when I believe it all culminates. This is
Hmm.
it. This
Yeah.
is, and I think the pests know, like, hey, the winter's coming. They can tell. I was just watching something on the news. I guess within the next month we will have 30 minutes less daylight. Like it's starting to ramp
Oh
up
yeah.
now, ramp
That's where it
down.
starts to drop. Yeah.
And I think there's a trigger to that. The circadian rhythm is a real thing,
Hmm.
and there's a
Hmm.
trigger to that to the pests and the insects and stuff. And I think they know. And so they're going to hit us hard. So it's like, well, obviously we can treat and stuff like that. But at the same time, there's two ways you can go about it. You can fight it or you can lean into it.
Yeah. But I also think that, like, if I, with what I know now, grew my garden in the same way I did even 10 years ago, I would be in a very different place when you asked me the question, like, what does my garden look like? So let's say I didn't have a spring garden at all and I came out, what, to the wall for summer. I would be in a very different place. And that leads me to this idea of, like, there's fatigue. I start talking about this around this time of year. There's fatigue that starts to set in. So when you said earlier, there's some things that are dying. Now there are potatoes, which I should have pulled by now by the time this airs. But what's dying in your garden that you're letting die? And I don't know if it was just the phrasing of it versus things that are, damaged is a bit different than dying. And when I heard dying, it's kind of like these things are on their last legs. I'm giving it its last hurrah,
Yeah.
because we're pretty strict around, like, if something is damaged beyond repair, get it out of your garden. But when I say, like, you're tired, you're letting things go a little bit longer than maybe you would have if it was 2 months into the garden season versus it now being, what's that, like 5 months into the outdoor growing season for me and 8 months into
Yeah.
this growing season because I started things back in January. So I don't know. I mean, it's an opportunity to start to reset some of my expectations, because reality, again, am I being realistic? Reality, if it hasn't set in my mind, my garden's going to make sure it does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so for my garden right now, my tomatoes are dying out,
Hmm.
but that's by design. Like, I designed my garden in August to kind of start to die out. And then what that does is and I do that by multiple ways. I do it by different varieties. I do it by different, heat tolerances of crops and stuff like that. But I also have sections of my garden that thrive right now. And so that's all part of the plan. But I do that because I know that it's going to be fall planting season here. By the time this airs, more than likely I will be planting something outside. What's the date in which this airs? Do you know?
It
Leonard?
is he's never going to get this right.
No.
August 14th. So
Okay.
we're right in the middle of August.
Yeah, so this is exactly when I should either be hardening off or
Hmm.
starting to
Hmm.
plant out. And so I let sections of my garden die out and be prepared. So, like, my corn is finished up. It's towards the end of July right now, and I'm harvesting my corn, my first crop of corn. I've got my second crop growing, trying to see if we can squeeze out another one, which only 50% germinated. Really weird.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I took the rest and I put buckwheat in just to kind of fill the bed up. But we're doing that. So, when those tomatoes are finished up, they'll come out, and then that's going to open up a total, if you add all the spaces together, a total of one bed will be opened up. So we also, on our fertilization schedule, are allowing it to kind of die out as well, let the nutrients kind of go before we restock the nutrients for our fall growing season.
Yeah. So would you design the garden in the same way if you were back in Massachusetts growing?
That's a good question. Man, I wish you would have asked me that before so I could have an answer. If I took, that's a hard question. I haven't lived there in about 10 years, and my gardening's changed dramatically in that time.
Hmm. Hmm.
But if I had stayed up there, yes, I probably would have ended up doing the same thing because, again, like that squash, I left that squash in there. I remember it had like a fiber holding the plant together, and I was like, oh, I'm going to hold on to it, So over the years, yeah, I probably would have ended up changing it. I was thinking back to the property. I would have had a big ass garden up there. I had a whole
See, I felt like your answer would have been immediately no, you wouldn't have designed the garden in the same way because some of the elements that influence the way you've designed your garden now are like very focused on your weather conditions.
well, my plantings
Yeah.
wouldn't be the same.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
you know, like right now I grow sweet potatoes, heat loving crop, okra, heat loving crop, eggplant, heat loving crop,
Mhm.
black eyed peas. Like I would grow different crops in different areas and I would be switching out. I would already have fall going in the ground by mid July up there. So
Hmm.
I lived in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and I would already have cabbages and you know a lot of the long season standing crops already planted because up there, I mean, dude, I think in August, if my mind serves me correctly, you would get like a week of heat, and then it would just stop, like all of a sudden. So it would I would have built a garden completely different, but I would have probably done it. But it's the season's so short that it's a little bit different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was just checking because I have now probably a dozen different areas on my weather app. So I pulled up the weather there because my sometimes my understanding of what a place like Massachusetts' weather is going to be is off. And so I'm looking and saying, well, gosh, it's warmer here where I am in Chicago, Illinois, than it is where you were,
Yeah.
which I don't know if I ever put that together.
Yeah. Well, the thing is too, and you know, this is why everywhere is different.
Hmm.
There is in the Cape Cod Bay, there's a so the water there in June would get up to about roughly 68 degrees, and then there'd be a big upwelling in the deep water, and that cold water would come, and then the water would drop to 54 degrees. Well, we only lived as the crow flies like a mile from the water, so we would get
Okay.
that cold water would blow cold air
Yeah,
over it, so it'd
yeah.
keep it a lot cooler. But we would get periods of heat, but it was so short that it didn't really matter. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So
Well, I felt like you were judging me in the moment of you'd have fall plants in.
no,
So that's where I'm like, well, if this
yeah,
our
you got
weather must be
defensive.
different. There's no and it would have been,
you
right?
you got defensive. No, I don't judge
Like
you
I'm
at all.
regretting even asking the question. Wait, hold on.
No, because I remember going into fall there, and it would just be like boom, that was
Yeah.
it. And I knew now I know that there was more on the table that I left behind. So yeah, I
Hmm.
would not have designed. I would have designed it the same way, but different. So I would have had cool season crops going way further into the spring. But I always grew food up there like I lived in the South because that's where I'm from. I'm from North Carolina, so that was what I knew. So it was a real learning curve. And then when I came back, I didn't. I had already gotten a lot deeper into gardening, so when I came back, I had to basically relearn all that stuff
Yeah.
again. It was a real pain.
Yeah.
But your garden's not designed the same way.
No, not at all. And this is a combination of where I am in Chicago, Illinois, but it's also who I am as a gardener, right? And it's kind of accepting the thing that like I view as a challenge, but accepting that's the way my garden runs. So for my summer plants, I was planting out in May and mostly June, right? So if you look at the latter part of May, early part of June, that's when my summer plants went in. So by the time we get to mid August, I'm just barely somewhere between 2 to 3 months planted, right? And so a part of the design by almost default then is everything that is on that kind of 90-day window is starting to perk up. So those green leaves, we're starting to get fruit on the plants that we planted for summer. Right. There are a couple of exceptions. I would have already had green beans, bush beans. I would have already had summer squash if they weren't decimated by the dirty little bastard. But everything else, when it comes to like when it's coming in earnest, it's taking off in August.
Yeah.
So much so where coming into mid August, I have thought about for years, planning to take time off right around the end of August, beginning of September, because I know that's going to be a high preservation time for me.
Yeah.
Right. And one more note, it's a challenge because everything looks so great.
Right.
And it's like, well, how do I start tearing stuff out, right? Like there's not a lot of depth when it comes to that summer stuff, but wait for it. Like a month from the time this airs, the garden, those same plants will look a lot different.
Yeah.
And that's still hard to accept.
Yeah, because I mean, here it is now, and my tomatoes are dying out right when I said they would die out, like to the
Mhm.
day. So it's just one of those things where it's like, and I plant determinate tomatoes for this purpose.
Yeah.
I have my second crop of tomatoes in which I was just out trying to. I'm trying to do. I ran out of tomato cages, so right now I'm
Mhm.
doing a very crappy version of the Florida weave to get me by. I don't know. I don't like the Florida weave. I do not like it, but for the cost, I'm not seeing any other way around it. I think I can probably, I think I'm just going to have to deal with it. But
Yeah.
we were just out trellising them now, and I'm like, man, they look rough, but they've been all balled up and everything. So we'll work through all that. That's neither here nor there. But yeah, the design of it was really to let it go. And I mean, it shows the difference in areas. In your
Mhm.
area, we've already gotten our flush. We've been preserving all that stuff. I got another bag of carrots I've got to do.
Mhm.
And we've been doing tomatoes and stuff like that. I think I may get maybe one or two more light harvests of tomatoes until
Mhm.
fall ish season. Hopefully, I don't know when they're going to start, but hopefully now that they're trellised appropriately, we can get more growth. But it's just one of those things. Like we just deal with it. We're going into this week. We're going to have 4 days above 95 degrees.
Yeah.
So it's like
Well.
things are going to kind of fall stagnant. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and that's the how the weather ebb and flows. Like that even goes back to the idea of like, are we being realistic? For me, mid-August is the time where I determine if I planted too much or too little
yeah,
of the things, right? Like these things are really coming into shape. And it also tells me if my garden design, quite literally, like the placement of plants, the placement of containers, how many I put into what square footage, like it tells me very clearly if I got it right or if I got it wrong. And oftentimes it's a combination of the two,
yeah,
right? Like there's no wholesale. Everything is perfect or everything is failing. Like it's definitely a combination of it.
yeah. I mean, the moral of the story here is, and I think it really is dependent on where you live. But if your garden's kind of struggling right now,
Hmm.
it's probably supposed to struggle. And
Yeah.
that's just the change of the seasons, the change of the time, the stress on the plants, the stress on your soil that you've added to it.
Hmm.
You got to think, man, you've been growing these plants and amping them up the whole time. So,
Yeah.
and I've noticed a few things in my garden this year, which we'll get into in a little bit, that make me, think maybe we need to change course a little bit.
Mm.
But I mean, that's just part of it. But it's once I learned to just let the garden run its course to an extent and back off, and then know that there's a whole nother season coming up, that I don't care where you live, you can absolutely have a fall garden. And that was when the breath of air came in, and I was like, okay, cool. Like, we're going to let our tomatoes die out. If the pepper plants aren't producing, which they will kind of go a little bit stagnant at one point, but if they're looking kind of rough and weak, go ahead and get them out and get that bed ready. And that's kind of left me in, because it's tough, because you want your garden to look like it's completely clear, and it's, or not clear, but it's like doing very well and lush and vibrant in the summer. But then you look back at it and you're like, once you get it replanted and you've got a whole nother crop in there, you're like, it's just a memory. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
in the
Yeah. It's
past.
definitely in the past. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I was gonna pull up the planter app to see as I'm heading into this period, I am, and I'm looking at the time it's taking for some things to produce that were planted in the summer or, maybe late spring going into the summer. And I'm kind of redefining my fall spaces in my head. And I'm curious to know if I was close to getting it right, kind of according to my garden plan. This is if I've learned anything about my garden, I've learned that I need like runway for a fall garden. Now, planting fall in containers, that's kind of one of the beauties of containers. Like I can position them however I think appropriate, to get optimal sun, to make sure that I'm watering them accordingly. But when it comes to the raised beds, I have tried to squeeze things in over and over and over again, and it just hasn't worked.
Yeah.
Right. I need a clear space. I need a full garden bed to focus on. So that's what I was going to check, to see if I really had planned to have a corner of a bed for fall, or if I really planned to say, all right, this 7 foot space is going to be for fall. And the itch that I have now is everything for my garden and the fall plantings I'm thinking about is it clear at the same time and then ready to plant for fall at the same time. So I do this dance of I have a 4 by 4 foot bed, and I'm just like, all right, what do I plant until I'm ready to plant fall things? By the time you hear this, I will be planting fall things. But in this exact moment, I'm like, well, how many weeks do I have in between? And if I leave it blank, am I gonna forget about planting it, right? And that's the part that I have to kind of trust my process, right? I
Yeah.
spent months thinking about this.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing. These are the times when your plans all come together.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
we need to remember that and just think like, this is, you've spent this time. Hopefully, you've been using the Planter app, which is a sponsor of the show. Amazing. Definitely want to use it. And it's because it's so visual
Yeah.
that you can easily lay it out. But it's like you said, I can go back and compare to what my plan was on the app. And I need to actually make my fall garden plan. I haven't even, it won't take me long. But now that I'm starting to see things happen, I can make a more accurate plan. And I kind of held off this year for that purpose. I went ahead and I started seeds and stuff like that. But when I noticed certain trends in the garden, certain beds
Hmm.
producing a certain way, that's when I started thinking like, okay, if I'm going to make a change, when am I going to do that? And at this time of year, it's into the next season. So
Hmm.
that's where the Planner app comes in really useful for me. It's a sponsor of the show. Check it out. It's on the Google and Apple Play Store. Use the link to get yourself a discount on the Planter app. But so I need to do that within the next week or two. But I went out there and I did the same thing you did. Like, what else can I put in there? What else can I do?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I did some cover crops. I just filled the gaps with cover crops. May be there for a month, maybe there for 2 months, may not be. I don't know, but I can terminate it whenever I want to.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
it's better than letting the weeds take over, because I've got one bed that didn't do so hot with the cover crop. I went through
Hmm.
and I laid it out and I was like, oh, I don't have any mulch to put on top. So let me go ahead and just run my rake over it. I buried the seeds too deep. I did get germination, but not as
Yeah.
much. So it's like I
Uh-huh.
got some bad weeds in there. My son, he doesn't know it, but he's signed up to help me get them out, and he's not going to be happy. But we'll get through it, and it's just one of those things. But at what point do you change your plans?
Yeah, I'm looking, and I think let's call it 6 spaces that I had focused on for fall.
6 square feet?
And no, 6 spaces, like 6 garden spaces, six
Okay.
garden beds, if you will. And one of them I've already decided to toss and let whatever's growing in the garden grow. So that's now I'm down to 5. And I got 4 of the 5 or 4 of the 6 right. Like my plan, what I came into the season with, will remain my plan. There's one other space where I was a bit ambitious, and I'm not going to be able to plant in that either. So I guess you could look at it and say 4 out of 6 beds will be fall as I plan. 2 of them I've made an adjustment, and just basically I'm forfeiting that space for fall based on what's growing now and how I anticipate it's going to continue to grow. And that's okay. Like 4 spaces for fall is it's pretty boss.
Yeah. I'm. I don't
It's
know
good
how.
real estate too. That's the key.
Yeah. I don't know how many spaces I'm gonna have yet. I'm literally, before we did this, I was in the process I was out there doing some work, and I
Mhm.
was in the process of looking at it and being like, okay, what's going next? Because we're about up to the phase where we're gonna start pulling stuff out. But I wanted to say, as we get into this time of year and you start looking at your garden and things are hurting, and just like you said, you may try to start cramming plants in, but is that necessarily the best course of action, changing your plan quite like that?
I think if when we would have done this episode 2 months ago for summer, yeah. Right
Absolutely.
now, for me, and my recommendation would be no. So the key is, and it's funny because you said it. Sometimes I'm just so linear in my thinking. I always have my garden plan in the Planter app with all seasons across the full garden, right? I have this color coding system that I use where I can see what was there in the spring, what was there for summer, and then what I plan to put there for fall. And it just dawned on me I'm going to create a new plan that's strictly only fall. And I may even, as I'm talking about it out loud with y'all in real time, I may even only put in the plan the beds that I just talked about that will be for fall, because it's, remember we were talking earlier and I said I can't see past the red walls. Like that's totally me. Seeing all of these plantings, like as I go into this critical part of my growing season, may just be too much for me. Like quite literally, I'm saying I'm simplifying these things. There are going to be
Right.
4 spaces that I'm going to plant for fall. All 4 of them have something growing as of this recording. I'm sorry, I got a little. I can feel myself getting hyped up about it because
Go
it's like,
for it.
wait a minute, this could be an aha moment for me.
Do it.
It's something as simple as I'm looking at this plan. All I need to do is follow this new plan, not follow this comprehensive 3-season outline that I've created. And that's what I've been doing over these past seasons. My instincts say if I can now just focus on what I'm planting out next for these 4 spaces, that could be the thing that I need personally to fight the procrastination, the second guessing, the wait, I should change this. Yeah, because that's where I end up in most times. It's like, well, my plan for 6 months has said plant kale here. And now I'm like, but what if and then it's like, all right, we'll just try it again next year.
Yeah.
So
Do you,
I think you have to know you and know your garden space as to whether or not you need to change the plan. And if you don't have a plan, I mean, this is the time to create one.
well, and we were talking earlier and you had said something about me.
Mm-hmm.
What did you say? I can't remember what you said. You can tone it down a little bit if you want, but what did you say?
Well, I mean, there are 3 things that I won't dare say.
Yeah,
I know you're
don't
not talking
say
about
that.
them. You don't want people to know about that. No. It's the difference between he and I, right? So I am, just like I said, I am on August the 10th looking and saying my plan for months has said to put this vegetable here, but I am thinking about doing something else. And I'm going to second guess the decision I made and had set on for 6 months and just jump in and do this other thing. It almost never works out for me. Where you, I feel like you said it, you don't forget it, but you just execute,
Yeah.
right? So there is not a lot of hemming and hawing, as my mom would say, that you're doing in your space. I can't imagine you ever sitting in front of a bed saying in August, I wonder, right?
No, well, I mean, it's so it's one of those things too where we keep going back to the realistic part of it, but it's
Mhm.
being realistic about it and understanding like this is what's going to happen outside. Like
Mhm.
you're going to get really hot. We're probably going to get a hurricane of some sort. Maybe not terrible, I don't know. But that's a definite possibility. It's going to be really humid, but we also know that this cool down is coming. And so I look at it and I say, well, what can I do realistically? What can I put in here? And I have to, especially this time of year, you really got to start counting down the days. I mean, you have to count down the days. And so I look at it and I say, well, I know that this takes this long to produce, this takes that long to produce, blah, blah, blah. And you start working into it and it's like, no, this isn't going to work. You know what I mean? Like I need to take it down a notch and just understand that I made this plan, and if it's not working for me, fine, but there's really nothing I can do to change it. So what's more important to me? And for me, it's more important for me to learn how that plant grows, learn how it grows in the season that it's in, and to attempt to get a harvest. But it's also more important than all of that is not to repeat the same mistake. And so I've done it over the years, and you've seen me do it. I take the L and I fucking and I tattoo it on my head. My bad. I tattoo it on my head, and I just like, look, I lost it. It's, it happens.
Yeah.
And you saw that with the wild garden. It sat there for years and years and years, and I struggled, and I struggled silently about it. But it just got to a point where it wasn't working out. So I waited that whole season. I grew that season in the plan. And what I told myself was, I'm going to watch it. I'm going to grow it. And this is the final chance. And if it doesn't give me what I want, plan B. It took me 4 years with that garden area to be like, no more. I was tired of fighting the soil. I was tired of fighting the weeds. I was tired of the minimal harvest. I was tired. And so I just backed off from it completely. But I stood that course because I didn't want, at the end of the day, there to be no question in my mind that I made the right decision. Because there was nothing worse than making a decision and be like, I shouldn't have done that. You know what I mean? I want to remove that option completely.
Yeah. I got a question for you, but before that,
don't make me drop another F-bomb.
Yeah, I made you do that. Yeah. There is a saying I have that goes something like, I hate to learn this lesson again. Right. It's the making the same mistake again and not acknowledging I'm going into this, giving this another try. We'll see if it works out. But like stumbling into that same mistake, it's like you've already learned the lesson. It's actually the same. Like I hate to learn that lesson twice. But my question to you is one reason you'd say is valid. And again, it's relative, of course, to change your plan mid-August.
One reason that it's valid?
Yeah. Give me one reason why it'd be valid for you or others to change your plan. And we're in mid August. We all got the same number of days left in the year. Maybe not the growing year, but in the year.
So what are you referring to when you say change plan? Like, are you talking about
whatever you want it to be?
Are you talking about like trying to plant something new for the summer season or the fall?
No, it's focused on fall. So I'll give you my example with the same question.
Okay.
So the growing space that I have that I had intended in the cage baby to plant for fall, I intentionally planted determinate tomatoes in that space, right? Because my mind said by the time we get to the end of August, those tomatoes will have wound down. Now, somehow, some way, Batavia came in and also planted peppers in that space. And my peppers most times go into the frost. And while I could pull them, I really don't like to. I like to have them, so as long as I can. So that space, I've just aborted the plan. There is no fall growing in that space, right? And it's because I am, one, just waiting still on tomatoes to be produced there. And two, I don't want to have to try to pull those tomato plants and plant behind the peppers. And for me, I have enough space to focus on fall. It's not a requirement to have that fifth bed.
So it's interesting because, first of all, there would have been two different answers. Yeah, but in the situation you gave me is the exact situation I'm in, where I looked at my bed and I said, these peppers look amazing. They're doing their thing, but the tomatoes are dying out. And so my original plan was to empty that bed. And I looked at it today and I started looking at it and I said, no, the best course of action is to pull those tomatoes out, plant that back row for fall, and run the peppers, because it's just like you. I always get another flush of peppers.
Yeah.
And now, with that being said, as I get closer and closer to the end date for the peppers and they're not producing, I will adjust again. And I will pull those plants, and then I will go back and I will put something else in it. It may be radishes, it may be turnips, something, quick growing. But that is an option that I have left open for that. It could be lettuce or something like that. but I'm going to keep my eye on it. So I do change my mind and I do change my plans, but it's based on what am I really going to get out of it, because there does become a time, I would say roughly into like mid-September where you really start to notice like these pepper plants ain't going to produce, man. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, what is the chances of you getting a bud to a full grown pepper in the waning sunlight hours of fall as it cools down? It's very slim. So at that
So
point, it's like, I changed my mind.
at the point of this episode airing, if I would have had all like serranos, all, Jimmy Nardellos, all jalapenos, all small kind of thin peppers in that space, then I'd again go with this could continue to produce. I did
Yes.
this in, I think it was September. I had flowers by the time we got to, this is on the back wall, and where the buckets are growing. And by
Oh, I
the
thought you were
time I
talking on
got
my
to the
back
last,
wall. I look back.
this is the backyard garden. If you see the garden over on Be Better Garden, so it's the wooden fence that I'm growing it up against, and it is the least sunniest in the backyard all throughout the growing season. So by the time we get to end of summer, early fall, there's not a lot of sun. So anyway, I had flowers. I want to say it was like an early September garden tour, and by the time we get to our average first frost, they had produced, but they were a serrano pepper, right? Again, they don't even get as big as a jalapeno. Now, the space I was just talking about that I'm forfeiting, I have bell peppers in that space. Now, that's to your point. Whatever I have by the time this episode airs, it's basically going to be, it's ripening more, right? But when it comes to the size of those pepper plants, I'm like closing in on this is the last of the new growth because
Yeah.
again, those are larger peppers. So I mean, at this point, now that we're recording, my plan is to leave it, but it is, and I don't want to put too much out there in the air. It is the assumption of healthy tomato plants all throughout the rest of the season until they're finished producing, and obviously pepper plants that are producing. Now, if I observe, hey, there's little to nothing on these plants, or something occurs, knowing that I have other pepper plants, other tomato plants, I may go back to my original plan.
Yeah.
It was the beauty in that original plan is that was one of the sunniest spaces in the backyard garden that time of year. So it was very deliberate until I had to figure out where to put three more pepper plants. So there's that.
Well, and I think the conversation here, the point of this is, and I know based on our experience that those smaller peppers are going to produce faster and
Mm-hmm.
more. So you are already going into it with a leg up, where
Yeah.
you're looking at it and you're like, I know that these bell peppers are going to take longer to produce, so you kind of already expect that to happen. And that's something that it literally comes two ways. One, by listening to the Backyard Gardens podcast and clearly learning from our mistakes, but two, like just paying attention to what's going on in your garden.
Yep.
I mean, once you do that, because I know in previous years, I mean, I've said this before on this podcast. One of my jalapeno plants, I pulled 50 jalapenos off of one jalapeno plant the day before our last frost. I never have done that off of a bell pepper. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I ain't going to leave a bell pepper plant out there for one bell pepper. I ain't going to do it. You know what I mean? It's just not worth it because I can get way more out of that space, way, way more. And the other thing, too, is I'm not going to overwinter my pepper plant, so don't suggest that I do that. I'm not interested in it. So, that's an option, too, but that's not something that I do, and I know that. And that's how you can change your plans effectively. But I've always just made my plan. I've stayed my course, and I've eaten crow, and I've dealt with it. And I've had low harvest, I've had high harvest, I've had good years, and I've had bad years. And I mean, I just had a comment on one of my videos the other day, and they were like, wood mulch does not cause nitrogen tie-up if you don't bury it. And I was like, okay, it's in contact with the soil. It absolutely does cause nitrogen. Because I've seen it, and it's well documented, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, I know that. Now, moving forward, I know that for a fact, so I can expect that in the future if I were to make that decision. So it's
And
like,
make adjustments accordingly.
and make
Yeah.
adjustments. And so I may make adjustments. So to most people, like the adjustments I make may not look like they're big, but to me, they're really big adjustments,
Yeah.
so.
I do have one more bit, and this is the bonus of, what's a valid reason to change your plan. When you look at your garden across this growing season and you consider what do you have enough of, what do you want more of,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
That's
I,
it. That's all. It's a
uh,
short bonus.
well, and also a change of plans could be something as simple as, should I fertilize today? You know, so
Mm-hmm.
like I said, next week I'm on schedule to fertilize. I have to fertilize my garden with liquid fertilizer in 2 sections, and one of the sections didn't get it. But at the same time, I've got corn that's finishing up, and it's going to be 95 degrees for 5 days. I don't
Yeah.
want those nutrients going to it right away. So that may not look on the outside like a big deal, but it's a really big deal on the
Mm-hmm.
inside of what I do. And those are just little micro decisions that I'll make here and there within my garden. And it comes with experience. But we got to stop. We've got a difficult question today.
Uh-uh.
Yeah. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah.
Okay. Hard stop on that one. All right. So Laura writes,
Shoot. Hey, Laura.
damn, every time, Batavia. Every
I'm like
single.
ready. I'm ready. Yeah, let's go.
Okay. So Laura writes, I'm planning on planting lettuce and spinach in the bed I pull the potatoes from. Can I plant tomatoes there for summer of 2026, or do I have to wait a full 12 months?
One, I'm pretty sure I'm going to plant lettuce and spinach where I planted potatoes. Look at us, Laura. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I probably should check the plan.
Yeah, you
So,
probably
anyway,
should. You should.
so you have something, the nightshade family and potatoes that she planted in the spring, right? She's putting couple of crops in between, which aren't harmful when it comes to, this crop rotation, because that's what we're talking about. So they'll complement, what she's growing when it comes to the lettuce and spinach. So can you the next year now put in tomato plants? So you have within a 12-month period almost the same family of crops.
6 months,
She's planting tomatoes next year in
but
2026,
she's
right?
got potatoes in now.
Oh, as in now. This is a current
Now,
question.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think the do as I say, not as I do, would be no, don't plant tomatoes, nightshade family
Yeah.
in 2026. Would I? Yeah. I mean, if that's, I'm assuming that's the space she has for it, right? If she has some other space to plant them, yeah, put them in some other space.
Yeah, I would not do it.
Mm.
And you should not do it. And it's hard not to do it. If that's if that's not confusing enough. I have this year I did this. I put pepper plants in a bed that had tomato plants last year. And I went on YouTube and I came on here and I said, I want to see what it does. I want to see how it produces, because my plan moving forward is not to put any nightshade in those beds at all next year. Well, guess what? It ain't doing so hot.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing that I'm probably going to end up changing. I'm probably going to pull those plants out and just get it ready for fall.
Yeah.
It's hard. And so Laura is doing it right, where you put the potatoes in, they use potassium, and then you go back and you put your spinach and lettuce in, because that uses nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're not using a depleted nutrient that already came from there. And then in theory, you're going to let that bed rest over winter to some extent, depending on where you are.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, if you leave a question for us, if you can put at minimum your state in, just so we can get an idea. That would be very helpful. But you were going to let it rest for a period of time, so that the thought, and then more than likely, you would plant another crop after that for spring. And then you would get your tomatoes in, which there are 2 crops in between. But the problem is you don't have a growing season, like a growing season for those pests and diseases to kind of go through. So you're already kind of, your soil's potentially charged for that. Now, truth be told, you could probably get away with it next year, but then I wouldn't touch it with a nightshade for years after that.
So I grew, and we know that there's Tomato Gate 2022, and we're back in the cage, baby. So I grew tomatoes in the cage, baby, in 2022 after a number of years of having grown tomatoes in that same space,
Hold
right?
on.
That's the key.
Tomato Gate 2022, we've got a lot of new listeners. I hate to break open an old wound. I don't even think the stitches have come out yet.
I wouldn't have brought it up if I wasn't.
I know.
Yeah.
But can you just say
So,
what happened?
yeah, so the cage baby is a 4 foot by 30-foot space in my backyard garden. It is like basically 3 raised beds inside of a wooden cage. And I intentionally had it built for the purpose of growing tomatoes for all my live long days and not having to fight with squirrels, basically,
Right.
right? They would be protected. And I grew in that space because that's where my original garden was for years, not exclusively tomatoes, but going back to like 2020 through 2022, maybe even 2019, 2020, 2021, and then 2022, I grew a lot of tomatoes. Like almost the entire space was tomatoes. And all of the plants that were in that space, that 30-foot space, and there were a bunch, maybe even up to 10 plants, had some level of sickness. Never really identified what the sickness was. My instincts tell me that in one area there was sickness and it spread based on it being close proximity. But obviously, when it comes to it being potentially a soil borne disease, that space had nightshades in it because it was tomatoes and peppers over and over and over and over again. So I very intentionally stopped growing tomatoes in that space. And now I'm returning back to it this year. Right.
And how's it going?
So I mean, Tomato Gate was in August in 2022, so we
So
haven't
we're on
gotten
the
there
so
yet
we're
when
on
it
the
comes to
watch
the
at this point.
supporting. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely on the watch. Things look good. I did grow tomatoes last year in a little cutout space where I hadn't grown tomatoes in the soil back in 2022. So all that's there was a break in my primary areas. So we'll see. So I was obedient after being punished by the garden gods for not being obedient if you believe in crop rotation. Now I brought that up because the front yard garden, I have a space right under the window. It's an awkward kind of space. I used to just grow flowers there for years. That's important, right? Just grow flowers there. I had some other spaces that, I kind of played around with it. I grew tomatoes there in 2 years ago in 23, and I grew tomatoes again in 24, selfishly. Both tomato years were just fine. I'm not growing tomatoes this year, to Ben's point. If you take the chance, right, and plant in the nightshade family, because this is the recommendation is to not, is to even spend up to like a 3-year rotation, not return to that space with the nightshade plants for 3 years. Um, and it worked out for me, right? But I don't plan on returning to tomatoes in that particular space under the front yard kind of window bed. And the key is, I don't know if I'd ever grown tomatoes in that space before. Maybe I grew tomatillos like maybe 4 or 5 years prior. So all of that said, depends on your garden. How new is your garden? How new is the soil? The best recommendation is going to be to not do it, as I said, the do as I say versus do as I do. Um, and if you have another space to grow it in, that's going to be your best chance. There is a video on Be Better Garden and the sadness in my face in 22.
Yeah. I mean, here's the deal with crop rotation. Do you have to do it? No, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Can you grow tomatoes the next year? Absolutely. Will they grow as good as they can? Maybe. But crop rotation doesn't matter until it matters, and then it
Mm.
matters big time. So,
Yeah.
too much to Batavia's point, she built this whole structure, money, just to grow tomatoes, and then had to stop for years and then go back. So it's like, what kind of chance do you want to take? I hate crop rotation. I'm gonna be honest with you. I hate it.
Yeah.
There would be
And you know what the
nothing.
irony is? I knew about crop rotation when I had the cage baby built.
I know you
Both
did.
versions of it.
I know
I
you
knew
did.
about crop rotation. So there's the nutrient part of it, and then there is the disease, and then there is the pests. So all three of those things are taken into consideration when you think about crop rotation. And
Nutrient
the
to me is not a
nutrient,
big deal.
hmm?
The nutrient part's not a huge deal to me.
Yeah, since I cut you off, I'll let you cut me off
Okay.
there. Like you can, yeah, you can accommodate for the nutrient bit, right? Like you
Yeah.
can make adjustments. You can amend your garden spaces to combat that if you need to or if you want to. The other two are it's that again, it's not a problem until it's a problem. Sometimes, it's the fire detector, the smoke alarm, right?
Yeah.
Like you hear that thing beeping, 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 like change the battery. Well, it doesn't matter until you need that thing to actually be working,
Yeah.
right?
And the thing, and like you can fight pests to an extent, but disease, and I mean,
Yeah.
we make this comparison a lot, but for all the listeners out there and for both of us too, I just want you to think about the last time you went by a farm in 2 years in a row and saw the same crop growing in the same space. You don't see that. And there's a reason why you don't see that. And so it's like we need to pay attention to that. These people make their living providing and growing food for everything, and they don't do that year after year after year. Or if you did have like a small farm that did that, you wouldn't see it more than 2 years in a row. So
Yeah. I'm not advocating for doing it because again, I've told you what
yeah,
I recommend versus what I do. Um, I also what is it worth for them? What's at risk? What's at stake? Right? You say they do it for a living, that's their livelihood. You get out there planting the same crop as a repeat year, and you could have total crop failure.
yeah,
Right? Now, just because, basically bills aren't going to get paid, if your tomatoes fail next year because your garden is different, you're not making a living off of it, doesn't mean that it isn't meaningful to you. Right? Again, I go back to the 2022 and I'll be honest, I wouldn't have stopped growing tomatoes there until I had a failure. So there's that bit. Like a hard head made a soft tomato behind. Um, and again, I made the adjustment. Another set of plants is brassicas. I try to move those around, and fortunately, I have the space to do it. Unfortunately, the number of brassicas I want to grow, I don't have the space to do that like every third year, like not return to a space, but for every 3 years, um, or I guess every fourth year. So I am a little bit more liberal, but I try to avoid growing brassicas in the same space,
year
year
after
after
year.
year because of fear. I fear what's the it's a particular fungus that you get into your soil. I've never had it even, but I'm so afraid of it that
You should be afraid of it because that
yeah,
kind of stuff you can't see.
I avoid, I minimize my risk for it, put it that way.
So I don't plant in the same bed, and so, okay, two thoughts. Nightshades and brassicas are the worst for crop rotation because they're giant families. That's
Yes,
the
yep.
absolute worst. I hate it. And it's just like you said, peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, and potatoes are the
Hmm.
four main ones. And so it's like you got all these, and you don't put tomatoes and potatoes together because that's just kind of weird. You're disturbing roots.
Hmm.
So it's like, what do you do? But I don't look at it like I have to rotate them for every 3 or 4 years. I just look at it as I have to rotate it out every other year at minimum. Now, when you start getting to a point to where it's like, I'm having a hard time rotating, you need to change two things. You need to either change what you're growing or how big your garden is. Because I will say this about a bigger garden, it does become easier to rotate. And then what you're growing or how you're growing it falls. And that's why I do the monocropping in my garden beds, because I can just take that one bed and move it forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing an in-ground bed, I think it was like 8 feet apart is what you want. So if you grow it in a row, you would want to move like 2 to 3 rows over or something like that, was kind of like the formula that was out there for that. But that's the difficult part with what we're doing, because, we're not growing a 100-acre field of corn or a 100-acre field of tomatoes. We're growing micro sections of it. So it does get a little bit more complicated. But so I say for Laura, do not take the chance. Figure it out. You got time. Roll with it, and then you won't be sad next year. What do you think, Batavia? What's your final answer?
Do as I say, obviously in a playful way. Plant the tomatoes somewhere else in 26.
There you go. Okay. Thank you, Regis. Okay. That was a good one. That's a tough question, and I feel the pain through that question.
Well, it's a tough question because we know that there's someone in this world that did exactly what Laura is asking about doing, and they were successful. But every garden isn't the same. Every soil isn't the same. All of the factors. Every season isn't the same. Your comment around how cold a winter would be.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So it's
a big
it's the
difference.
gift and the curse of us having so much exposure to everyone else's gardens.
Yep. And if you'd like to be like Laura, you can leave us a question on our Facebook page, which is Backyard Gardens Community Garden. We have one up there for questions right now for the end of summer. So you can find those, and we will put those up periodically as we run low on questions. You can email us at bygquestion.com, or you can simply leave a question on our YouTube. Make sure that it says question, and we will get to it. But very good. And I think crop rotation is another subject that I honestly don't think you can talk about enough. I think there's a few that you could just go on and on and on about. But there's always something new. There's always new research. Just saw the other day that marigolds, in fact, do not give you enough insect protection to make it worth putting in your garden. New information all the time. I've been saying it for years, just saying. All right. You got anything else?
No, man.
Well, good.
I'm done.
Well,
I'm tapped out.
Support the show any way you can. Please buy some seeds from us, become a subscriber, all that good stuff, and check us out on YouTube. We would love to see you over there. As soon as we get to the point where we can, we will release all of the member videos on YouTube. So to members of YouTube. So please check us out there. And as usual, we do 2 things on this show. We learn to grow, and we grow for change.
See ya.